Welcome back to another edition of Through the Smoke, a Miami Hurricanes football and recruiting podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. David Lake will be joined by Gabby Urrutia here in a minute, but wanted to get this thing rolling. We're going to do another mailbag type of episode here. After the first week of fall camp in the books, we've learned quite a bit about this team here over the first week. There's still plenty more to learn. Nothing is set in stone here during fall camp. And so even the things we talk about today after 1 week are going to be outdated soon. But still, I think it's valuable to provide a snapshot as to where things stand with the team in general after the first week. Before we dive into the questions, want to highlight our sponsors, of course. We'll start with Canes Connection. It's Miami's collective, play a massive role in helping the Hurricanes in the talent acquisition space. Go support those guys at Canes Connection as best you can, canesconnection.com. If you have been injured in a slip and fall accident, boating accident, trucking accident, Uber or Lyft accident, Nick Bucerino is the personal injury attorney you should contact at 561-960-9870 or visit his website at flinjury.law. And also, if you're in the real estate market, whether that's buying, selling, or investing in South Florida real estate, you should know Aaron Pascal with the Keller Williams Group. Grab a free home value report or quick market update. Call or text Aaron at 305-497-5773 or visit apascal.kw.com. All right, so again, as I said, hopping into a mailbag episode, ask the Through the Smoke message board community here for questions, topics that they wanted us to discuss here on the podcast. And so we'll dive into it. And again, Gabby will jump in, and when he's here, he'll be answering these questions as well. We'll start with Vandy Kane 34, who asks, with no marquee opener this year, are you finding that you're getting more access to the team and more practice viewing during fall camp, or is Mario Cristobal as secretive as ever? So yeah, definitely, I think it's fair to say like there's a different vibe when you're starting a season against Notre Dame compared to starting a season against Stanford, like Miami is this year. In terms of like access though, and you know, wanting to keep things kind of quiet, I think it's the same. Still secretive, still some things that, I think that we see that Miami doesn't necessarily want us to talk about. They don't necessarily want us to report and publish and discuss depth chart type stuff here in the first few weeks of camp. Injuries, they don't want us to discuss things we see of that nature, whether the guys are missing or guys are in limited jerseys, etc. So all of that is still kind of the same. And just in general, this is football mentality, and it's all good when it comes to that stuff. But it does lead to some challenges in terms of like how we're supposed to discuss the team and report. And so, frankly, from like our perspective, there's some cloak and dagger talking around stuff and trying to discuss things from a standpoint of, if you have the ability to read between the lines of what we're saying, you probably understand what we're talking about. If you just take what we take from the surface level, like, yeah, you'll get the information, but also maybe you'll miss what we're saying, what we're really trying to say, which kind of brings me to the next question. My next point comes from BP Miami Canes, who asks, from your recent comments, David, it seems that Ben Congdon has taken some significant steps forward from the spring, to the point where he seems higher on the pecking order than Cantwell in terms of freshman offensive linemen. What is Congdon doing well that has him elevated, and what areas is Cantwell perhaps a bit behind on? So I wrote a VIP insider that said this, VIP notes on the entire team. And here's what I wrote about true freshman offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell, and Ben Congdon. I kind of combined them into the same note. Here's what I wrote. Freshman offensive lineman Jackson Cantwell and Ben Congdon are being thrown into the fire and getting plenty of reps with the first team. Cantwell is getting plenty of looks at guard and tackle, with Congdon getting looks at guard. Both players are elite talents. At this stage, it appears Congdon is more ready to contribute right now, but both will certainly earn roles during the season. Now, and I get it, the way that this was kind of digested, I feel like by the fan base, unfortunately, by a lot of people, is that Cantwell is not playing well. That was not my intention at all, but I understand it to some extent in terms of why that's the way that that was interpreted. Because look, we're not able to like totally talk about depth charts, and we're not able to totally talk about what we see, where guys are getting reps, etc. And again, this goes back to my point earlier about like the way we have to talk about stuff. We provide a lot of context clues, and you just got to be able to pick up on what we're talking about. And I feel like for the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks before fall camp, we started kind of hyping up that Samson Okunlola was going to get a chance to show what he could do at left tackle, and Matthew McCoy was still going to, play right tackle, show what he could do there. Those are two veterans, and I think unless things really go poorly on the field, which we'll see how it plays out during the regular season, those are the guys that I would expect to start game one against Stanford. They're veterans, they have experience, they have offensive tackle length, and so I expect Miami to kind of roll with them. After the spring, when we were talking about Jackson Cantwell progressing during the spring as the left tackle, doing a good job on a good trajectory, and as, the starting offensive tackle, I think maybe from like, I'll just talk about my individual perspective, I kind of assumed that maybe Samson Okunlola was going to stay at left guard, which is where he'd primarily been playing in 2025. Again, a couple weeks before fall camp, I started getting the buzz that no, Samson's worked hard, improved his body quite a bit, has that tackle quickness that's required, and he's going to get a shot to show what he can do at left tackle. And that kind of changed the game in terms of like, okay, where do you now slot in Jackson Cantwell? And again, Jackson's playing tackle, Jackson's playing some guard. He's mixing and matching, which is fairly common for an Alex Mirabal offensive line. But he's trying to find the right path to playing time for him. So, and look, I think that path for Jackson at first is going to have to be on the interior offensive line. And, we've hyped up. Again, we've made it clear, like Miami is mixing and matching all over the place. We've also made it clear that this offensive line for game one against Stanford probably going to look different in the final game of the regular season or the CFP if Miami makes a CFP, because it's all going to, at the end of the day, sort itself out. And so where I kind of stand is like, look, I think Ben Congdon and I say this too, like I think Jackson Cantwell is a big time talent. I think he's going to be a big time player in time. He just needs time, and there's nothing wrong with that. He has an insanely high ceiling. He's just coming from Nixa, Missouri, and this is a totally different ball game of competition than what he's used to. He's going to be just fine when he figures it all out. He just needs the time to figure it all out. And so when we talk about Ben Congdon, yeah, he's probably just further along in terms of like understanding how to play football at this level right now. That doesn't mean he's going to end up being a better player than Jackson Cantwell in the future. I am very high on Ben Congdon as a talent in general. As I said in the VIP note, I think both of these guys are elite talents. And so, just because I personally feel like when I watch that Ben Congdon is further along than Jackson Cantwell right now, that does not speak poorly on Jackson Cantwell. And I think both players are going to be very good. And I think Jackson Cantwell is going to start some games this year eventually. I think Ben Congdon is going to start some games this year eventually. it just has to all work itself out on the offensive line because it's going to be a lot of mixing and matching and ups and downs, I feel like, before they really know who their best starting five is. So that's kind of where I wanted to address like my Ben Congdon thing and what I would say there. I feel like he's a very advanced offensive lineman for a true freshman, both physically, like he is a monstrous dude. And, I think he has good technique for a freshman. There's always stuff to clean up there. But I think he's going to be a guy that plays as a true freshman on the offensive line on the interior. So, and I think Cantwell's going to rotate at tackle some. He's going to rotate on the interior some. And Miami just has to figure out where he can be most effective for this season. In the long term, he's going to be a tackle. For this season, what's the best place to plug in Cantwell and let him get those valuable reps and kind of get his career started? Gabby's here. Gabby, we were talking Cantwell and Congdon because my little report. We were talking about like how people were interpreting that I was saying Congdon is ahead of Cantwell in terms of like maybe thinking that, oh, Cantwell's not good. That wasn't my intention at all. I'm curious, like, how do you view the Congdon and Cantwell thing? Because you're out there watching as well. Do you think what I wrote is unfair in terms of like right now, playing today, Ben Congdon might be further ahead? That doesn't mean anything towards the future, but what does it mean right now?
Right. I think it's fair. I think the way that you painted that picture was fair. And I agree. I think just from what we've been able to see so far, and again, I don't think that it's something negative about Jackson. I think maybe it just is more about Ben. And look, with Jackson Cantwell is a freak athlete. He's going to figure this out. And David, I'm just going to pull this from, I'm not sure if you referenced Bruce Feldman's freak list, which dropped today. That's
Yeah.
always a fun read. Jackson Cantwell's peak power output, which is, I guess, Miami's metric of measuring just overall power, explosiveness, however that formula is determined. His peak power output is 9,461 watts. And for context, Francis Mawanoa's ahead of his junior season in which he was drafted as a first round pick, his maximum output basically in his Miami career was 9,273 watts. And Feldman with the caveat that it was Maui Noah's was by far the most of the Miami team in 2025 by almost 1,000 watts.
Yeah.
So Jackson Cantwell is freakishly strong. He's
Yes.
freakishly athletic.
Yes.
But this stuff takes time. Offensive line is a very technical position, and I think just considering the context of where Miami's at, we're early in fall camp. Like Jackson Cantwell is going to be just fine. But
Yep.
Ben Cogden is also a really good freshman that Miami brought in. And there's a lot more that goes into offensive line play than just being, the big, long, strong freshman. And, sometimes it does take guys a little bit longer to just adjust and acclimate. Jackson Cantwell is also playing kind of a different position, sort of, with
Hmm.
moving to guard and kind of having to play right tackle and all these different things. Miami's defensive line is also very, very good. So I think that that's important context too.
Hmm.
But I think Ben Cogden being how we would I think we would both describe it this way, David, because I agree with you that I would say Ben Cogden's probably a little bit further along. I just think that that should be consumed as a good thing because it's not like Jackson Cantwell has been bad. It's more
Yeah.
about It's more about Congdon than it is about Cantwell. And I think in
Right.
general, Miami fans should be really, really excited that there are two freshman offensive linemen on the roster that have the capability to be multi-year starters, multi-year contributors, really with NFL upside and NFL frame. So I think that's the way, if there's just more, painting the picture of what this is, I think that's how I would kind of frame it. And so I think
Yeah.
you did a good job of it, but that's just what I wanted to
And
add to
then
that discussion.
in addition to this, I think we also have, and I acknowledged this earlier, but yep, we also have to acknowledge like Samson Okunlola has taken a step forward. So
Right.
that changed the dynamic at tackle. So it's all these elements. And again, Jackson's going to be just fine. Jackson's going to be a total stud. He's going to be a first round pick. It's just like you're alluding to, Gabby. He needs to work on his technique, which takes what? Reps and time. And he
Yep.
needs to work on his processing, his understanding of what it takes at this college level. And that takes what? Reps and time. He's going to
Yep.
get there. He's a smart guy, and it's going to be all good. But right now,
Yep.
today, I think it's just fair to say Ben Congdon is number one pushing for a starting job, and he's further along than Jackson Cantwell. Doesn't mean a bad thing on Jackson. Again, as I wrote, they are both elite talents. So it's exciting to think about. Let's go to the next question. Hollywood 26. Now that Omar Thornton's coverage skills are starting to emerge, do you think he can lock down the full time nickel spot? All summer, I've heard the plan was to have him play more safety than nickel, so I'm curious if that's starting to change. I mean, I don't know if, more safety than nickel was like something that we said, but, I think it's still going to be Bryce and Omar. I think Bryce is going to play a little bit there too. But I will say, like, from what we've seen, Gabby, like, I'm really impressed with how Omar looks in that nickel role. And he is doing a really good job in coverage in particular. And we already know that he's very physical. So if I was going to say who's going to have the most snaps in the nickel position this season, I would say Omar.
I agree. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I think that position just naturally fits him. Just his play style. I just think the overall frame, he's not the biggest guy. He's not like small, but he's also not like the biggest guy. Just again, that aggressiveness that you can depend on him to play the run, to be physical at the point of attack, to be a playmaker, the ability to knock the football out, all those things. He forced 4 fumbles at Boston College in 2025. And then I think just with what we've seen from him in coverage, look, Keontae Scott set a very, very high bar for what the nickel role should be at Miami and what the expectation is. But I think Omar Thornton is in that like tier of just like he can be a very, very efficient nickel, a very good, productive nickel at Miami,
Hmm.
especially in this defense. And I'm really high on the talent. I'm really high on the player and just everything that we've seen from him so far. And I think he's someone that's going to help Miami's defense tremendously. I think specifically in that nickel spot. And if he has to move to safety, I think he can do that too. I think people believe in him too, but I view him as a really high quality nickel.
I do too. I think he's probably, and I thought he was good. I think he's probably better than I expected. So
Yeah.
I think he's going to be like Keontae was. I think he's going to be another fan favorite
Yeah, for sure.
as this season progresses. Shane the Cane asks, Bain and Mesidor were incredible at setting the edge and run defense. In comparison, how do you feel about our edges this year in setting the edge? I mean, I think it's fine. I don't think it's going to be at last year's level, but I think it's still going to be pretty good. But let's see how it plays out in the season. That's how I would answer that.
Yeah, I think we still have to kind of see it from a lot of those guys. Like, I think that that's going to be probably one of the biggest challenges for Damon Wilson, who I think is kind of coming in trying to prove that he's more than just a pass rusher. Armando Blunt kind of taking that step after playing, 400 snaps a year ago, kind of learning the importance. And I think these guys also saw what it means to set the edge and how it's supposed to look with the way Mesidor and Bain did it. Obviously, they need to go and physically do that themselves, but I'm confident in this defensive end group, and I think that that's going to be one of the biggest things that we probably still have to learn about this group of edge rushers because I do think the talent and all that's there, but I think setting the edge is going to be a key in determining how successful they ultimately are.
Go Canes 20 asks, I'm very interested in the development of some guys who can push to be in the two deep, like Kellen Wiley, Bobby Pruitt, Booker Pickett, Third Scroggins, Jabori Antoine, Dylan Day on defense. And then he talks about offense, Jaden Wilkerson, Max Buchanan, Ben Congdon, Jackson Cantwell, the freshman tight ends, Gavin Miller and Izzy Briggs, Jordan Lyle on offense. Which of these guys can you see breaking through and being big difference makers on this team out of the gate and as the season progresses?
Yeah, I mean, I think of this group, I mean, with the defensive side, on the defensive side of the ball, just going through a lot of those names. Look, I think Herbert Scroggins has an interesting opportunity, just as, with Hayden Lowe's departure. Jason Taylor is very high on him. He spoke super highly of Third Scroggins just when I spoke with Jason Taylor at Media Day about just the way he goes about his business the right way. I think someone's going to have to kind of like emerge as that fourth defensive end. I think Herbert Scroggins has a good chance. He played a lot in the college football playoff. They always point back to that, how he kind of stuck with it. And he emerged as someone who rotated in occasionally and probably would have played more if Ruben Bain and those guys weren't waving him off. But I think Third Scroggins is someone that has the respect of the program. Jabari Antoine, I think in the cornerback room, I think
Hmm.
he's going to push some of the guys in front of him. Again, there was a pretty steady rotation of four guys last year between OJ Frederique, Damari Brown, Ethan O'Connor, and did I say Xavier Lucas? And I think Antoine is gonna compete to crack that rotation or just force their hand in having to add him into the equation because he's very talented. I think he's having an awesome, awesome fall camp so far, and
Hmm.
it's been encouraging to see what we've seen from him. Uh, Offensively, like I think a lot of those guys are super intriguing. I think Jordan Lyle specifically is the guy that I'm super,
Yeah,
super excited to see what he does in the fall. I think last year didn't go the way that he expected. I don't think it went the way Miami expected it to go for Jordan Lyle. And I mean, I think it's well reported at this point. I
he's
mean, just
locked
well,
in.
or, right? Yeah, he's playing at a unique level. He looks like the guy who went out and won this running back job a year ago. He beat out Mark Fletcher to kind of
Hmm.
come out with the first team offense against Notre Dame last year. Like Jordan Lyles looking more like that guy. His frame is extremely impressive at 210 pounds. He looks awesome. He's moving explosively. He's fast. He's creating big runs. In those team settings, and I think Jordan Lyle is someone who's primed for a breakout year. And I think if we get the version of Jordan Lyle that I think we expect to get, I think Miami's going to be really, really difficult to stop on the ground for a lot of these teams that they're going to have to play.
Yeah, of the guys that go Canes 20 listed, I would go Jabori Antoine on defense. I'd go Lyle on offense. I'd go Ben Congdon and Jackson Cantwell on
Yeah.
offense, the guys he
Yep.
listed.
Yep.
Mitri 9016 asks, do you believe that given the proven talent and incoming talent from recruiting and portal this offseason, that not being ranked in the top five in the preseason would be an unfair assessment by the media and coaches? I mean, look, in the coaches poll, Miami's ranked number seven. I don't think that's necessarily like unfair. I get it.
Right.
I think, in one of these preseason podcasts I did, I said personally I would have like Miami number three. Now I'm Homer biased Miami podcaster guy, so take that with a grain of salt. But I think anywhere from three to seven's fair. And, so you know, I think this is a top five team, but I get it if people look at the roster and say, oh, they got to replace their stud D end
Hmm.
tandem, their first round offensive lineman, their quarterback. That's a lot to replace. So I get it from that sense too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I'm at. Like, I understand like the national narrative, and look, honestly, Miami's getting a lot of national buzz, so like, I don't
Yeah.
think that there's a shortage of that. And and look, I think everyone has something to say about preseason rankings and if they matter, do they not matter? Like, to your point, David, I do think that this is a top five team where they slot in that top five, and really within that top 10, I think will ultimately sort itself out. I do think that in general, Miami is getting a lot of preseason love. So the number next to their name, it doesn't really matter to me. But I think the consensus at this point is that Miami is a top five ish type of team, a top 10 ish type of team, depending on who you ask and what they want to say about it. I also understand the question marks that kind of come with Miami with all the line of scrimmage talent specifically coming out and or just departing the program due to between Ruben Bain and Mesidor and Francis Mauigoa and Mark Bell and and as Cooper, all these guys. Like I understand from an outsider's perspective that you look at Miami and you wonder how do you actually replace that much? So I think wherever Miami falls within the top 10 is fair. I think if you start pushing it anything beyond like eight, nine, I think it's like, all right, I think you're trying to kind of maybe be that guy. But in general, I'm fine with where Miami's kind of slotted, at least in this coaches poll, preseason poll kind of debate talk.
Paul Erickson throws out preseason picks for various,
Oof.
awards or notorieties.
Are we getting
And
some over-unders right now? Some Paul Erickson over-unders?
no, no
Ah,
over
I was
unders,
itching. I was itching for a Paul Erickson over-under.
but it's in that vein. You'll like
Yeah.
it. So we'll
All
go
right.
rapid fire. Uh, he wants to know who our picks would be for offensive player of the year.
Darian Mensah.
I'll go Malachi.
Yeah.
But most improved offensive player.
Most improved offensive player. That's good. Jordan Lyle.
Yep, I agree. Offensive rookie of the year.
Ooh. Start ruffling some feathers. No, I'm just kidding. Ben Cogden.
I'll go Ben Congdon. Defensive player of the year.
Armando Blunt.
I'll go Justin Scott.
Man,
Most improved defensive player.
OJ Frederick.
I'll go Armando Blunt.
Okay.
Defensive rookie of the year.
Oof. I think you got to go JJ, right? JJ Jonigan.
Yeah, I think you got to go JJ. So we're on the same page for a lot of those, but there's honestly you could have answered a lot of different ways for all
Yeah, for
those.
sure.
Go Canes 20 as a recruiting question for you, Gabby.
Ooh.
Rumors floating that the staff put out that they wanted a small class purposely, and it will still end up in the 24 to 26 range. Is that the case? If so, I'm assuming they're whale hunting. Jacobs, Matthews, MJC, Spell, maybe a surprise, etc. And maybe a late riser or two. And I'm assuming with Lowe out the door, this puts the pressure on to land Jacobs. Is this a fair assessment? What kind of recruiting news can we expect over the next 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, look, I think just throughout the time that all this stuff was coming out about wanting a small recruiting class. Look, I think just coming out of the summer, I think they ended up being kind of exactly where they said that they were going to be. And we always talked about how they wanted to give themselves sort of some wiggle room to evaluate during senior seasons. I think they're exactly where they kind of said that they were going to be. Was the small class thing, really hammered home? And was there maybe just some sort of like maybe sure, like I still think in general it's going to be like closer to the smaller side, but Miami is also not in the business of saying no to really good players. So I think that you
Hmm.
always have to kind of consider in the back of your mind that guys like DJ Jacobs is always going to have a spot at Miami if he wants to come to Miami. Myson Johnson Cook or Akeem Spell, if either one of those guys said that they wanted to go to Miami, Miami's not turning away those types of players. A Jackson Dollar. If Jackson Dollar wants to come to Miami, they're not turning away a Jackson Dollar. A David Show. If David Show wants to be at Miami, Miami's going to make room for all of these guys. So I think there are, roster decisions, there's a whole roster equation as you're projecting. There's a certain number of scholarships that you have, and you have to kind of project to see how you're going to allocate. But Miami also has to evaluate its own roster here in Miami's also evaluating its own roster in fall camp and just throughout the season as they kind of, again, eventually get to that portal window where you have to decide who are you moving forward with? Who are you okay with? Who's a priority to keep? Who are you okay with kind of cutting bait with? And how much more room do you want to allocate for the transfer portal versus your high school recruiting class? You can't sign 30 high school recruits every year. That's not like that. The math doesn't work out if you do that consistently. You need to leave room to retain and leave room for the transfer portal. So I guess this is a long-winded way to answer this question, but like I could still see this class being maybe like going from maybe being a small class to a normal size class. I feel like the barrier to that is pretty thin. Like what's a small class versus like what's a kind of like a normal typical size class. And I also know that Miami is going to evaluate. They're going to watch guys. They're going to push on guys late. They're going to try to flip guys. And of course, all these whales and all these big time guys, they're going to continue to go after. So what the class size ultimately ends up looking like, who really knows? But I do think their summer plan was to keep it around the number that it's at right now, give or take one or two spots. And, they're going to kind of just move forward from here.
My No No Square asks, how much of an emphasis on special teams do you see this offseason from eliminating holding penalties to return blocking? I mean, look, from what we get to watch, Gabby, I do think like there's a little bit more of an intensity
Hmm.
to the way that special teams period is being coached compared to, recent years prior. Um, but it's kind of the same amount of time. I just think it's more of like an intense approach of driving home the point. And I know, like for a fact too, before fall camp, that the special teams phase was emphasized heavily during the spring and summer months, probably at a higher level. Of course, this is all a reaction to the Indiana game when you allow a blocked punt for a touchdown. So I think there's more of an intensity about it.
Definitely. And I feel like Mario Cristobal is always kind of standing front and center when they're going through these special teams drills and things like that. So, of course, I think it's a reaction to that, but absolutely an intensity with it.
Mitri 9016 asks, do you see these stats as feasible for the upcoming year during the regular season? All right, so let's run through it, Gabby. Total offense exceeding 5,500 yards.
Wow. Total offense? Yeah, I guess I would have to probably know. Like, what was Miami's total offense last year? Sorry, I feel like I would need some context points of just like what are we talking here?
That's a lot of yards.
See, it sounds like a lot of yards, but like, is that would that be like clear cut number one offense in the country?
It would be a top five offense in the country.
I mean, I think that this statistically could be a top five offense in the country.
Yes, I agree. Defense allowing less than 15 points per game,
Last year's defense was like 14.6,
including the playoff,
including
yes,
the
when
playoff.
things went down.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a low number. But yeah, I mean, I think given the ACC schedule, I think that that's for the regular season, I think that
Yes.
that's possible for sure.
I think it is too, because that's kind of a lot about like who you're playing. So I
Right.
think it's possible. Mensa throwing for more than 4,000 yards and 40
Mm,
touchdowns while having less than 10 interceptions.
that's a lot. I'll probably take the under there, but like
I'll say no.
I think he threw for 3,900. I'm probably on the boat that that number is going to dip a little bit, but I still think he'll be super productive in this offense for
I think
sure.
if you include the postseason, I think he'll eclipse those numbers production wise.
Yeah,
But in the regular season, I'd be like 3,700-ish probably, and 40 touchdowns is a lot. I don't know about
it's a
40
lot of touchdowns, man.
in the regular season. Um, but he's going to be very productive and a good player. Malachi Tony getting 80 receptions and 1,000 yards receiving. That's a yes from me.
I think that's a lock. I was looking this up, David, really quick because I was so this I mean, we kind of talked about this before. Now it's now five straight seasons that a slot receiver in a Shannon Dawson offense has caught for at least 1,000 yards.
Hmm.
And each of so two guys did it in back-to-back seasons, Tank Dell and Xavier Restrepo. The
Hmm.
second leg of those back-to-back 1,000 yard receiving seasons for both those guys, the numbers actually improved,
Hmm.
both from a yardage, catch, and touchdown standpoint.
Hmm.
And so
And you're
yeah,
talking
like
about Tank Dell and Xavier Restrepo.
Tank Dell and Xavier Restrepo. So
Hmm.
like their second season, their second 1,000 yard seasons, the numbers got better. So I actually like I know Malachi no, Tony's numbers were crazy, 109 catches, 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns. Like I think it's within reason to like expect like a better year, or at least a better year from like a yardage, yards per catch standpoint, touchdown scoring standpoint. 109 catches is crazy, but I think Malachi Tony could potentially be more explosive, which could lead to just bigger
Yeah.
numbers in
I
general.
think I think you would agree he's a better player right now than he was last fall.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
The other one he brings to the table here is rushing attack more than 2,000 yards. That's a
For
yes
sure.
for me.
Yeah, it's an easy yes for me.
And then the last one, tight ends getting more than 600 yards receiving
Mm.
combined.
Nah, that's a
I'll
no for
say
me.
no. I'll say
I don't
no.
think I could. I can't get there.
Coach JCaz425 asks, how critical is it for Miami to reduce the pre-snap penalties on offense? I think if this team is going to truly rely on the run game early in the season, they're going to have to cut back on that. Otherwise, you're constantly playing behind the sticks. Hard to sustain drives as a run-first operation that way. I also think reducing pre-snap penalties would help negate some of the growing pains the O-line would experience with pass protection initially. I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely an area that Miami wants to be and can be more efficient year over year. Last year, Miami was averaging 7 penalties per game, which ranked 103rd in the country. And look, a lot of this is just because they're on the field all the time and it's the nature of their positions. But last year, Inez Cooper, Markel Bell, Samson Okunlola were three of the four uh, biggest offenders on offense and combining for 22 penalties. On defense, David Blay was the biggest offender with 6. Ruben Bain had 5. Cam Pruitt and Chase Smith, to me, just in general, like they need to clean up their special teams penalties. They each had 3 penalties. Bobby Pruitt had some massive penalties on special teams in that Indiana game, unfortunately. And look, you compare. So last year on special teams, Miami had 19 penalties called against them just in the special teams phase. You compare that to Indiana, who also played 16 games, just like Miami did, and they had 11 special teams penalties. So Look, I think like every coach will tell you, the competitive penalties, they're fine and they're expected and it's going to happen. The ones you control are the ones like you're alluding to in this question. The pre-snap stuff, the discipline stuff, you got to eliminate that stuff. But I do think, Gabby, like, and this doesn't excuse penalties, but I think it's worth noting that, in my opinion, I think this offense is going to be more explosive year over year.
Hmm.
And so when you're explosive, you have an easier time of overcoming those silly 5 yard penalties that happen, right? And last year's offense was a good explosive offense. It wasn't an elite explosive offense. And so it had some issues overcoming those penalties in the games we saw, like SMU and Louisville, right? So I think it is a point of emphasis. I do think though this offense in general will be able to overcome them better because it's going to be more explosive.
Yeah.
Ef, go ahead.
No, no, no. You're good.
Ethan26 asks, any insights on the new kickers and how they're looking? We went from a low point of Bubba 5 years to 5 years of Borregales brothers, and it feels like we've trended in the wrong direction since Andy graduated. Um, Look, I think they have Jake Weinberg, they have Jack Olson. I think both guys are doing well in camp. I think Weinberg has the NFL leg and, catches your eye with that. And then Olson's just kind of the steady guy. I could see a scenario where you have a long and a short field goal specialist
Hmm.
situation, but I mean, look, Gabby, for me, where I stand with like field goal kickers is like honestly, I don't think you can really evaluate them, unfortunately, until they're in games. It's just a totally different ball game. That position, practice compared to the pressure of a real game. So, look, Jake Weinberg has crazy leg talent and is
Yeah.
insanely talented. But last year at Florida State, it just unraveled bad. So, can he fix that part of his game year over year? I think is the big question with him. I think luckily Miami has two good options. And so, I think it's going to be a situation where the field goal kicking is going to be good.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think look, it wasn't always perfect with Carter Davis last year and Bert Auburn, but I think the formula that Miami has settled on, and just talking to Danny Coulter, the special teams coordinator at Media Day, he kind of just like re-echoed this. Like they like what they have going on with basically bringing in two transfer kickers who have kicked at the college level and kind of allowing those guys to compete, and just whoever wins that job wins that job. And so they did that this season, which honestly, like I think the pair of Jake Weinberg and Jack Olson are better. I think just better overall.
They
They're
are.
two better situations than
Yep.
Bert Auburn, who was kind of again he did his career at Texas did not end well. Carter Davis was just like kind of raw and like they didn't really have much to go off of. I think both these guys, you have a pretty good idea of what they are, and I think just like the opportunity for them to compete and see who the best would be in as competitive of situations as you can put them in. I think just kind of pinning two guys together and forcing them to compete creates at least a little bit more of like that competitive factor that you can't
Right.
really replicate. Just to your point of just not being able to replicate the reps until you're on the field in a game setting and there's a bunch of people screaming. I think the only other way that you can kind of replicate just a sense of urgency or just like a high pressure environment is when there is legitimate competition and you're actually trying to win a job. So I think that just that formula will ultimately see how it plays out. Like if I had to guess, I think the big leg of Jake Weinberg, if he can kind of get it all settled in, like I think I'm saying this. I'm not saying anyone has told me this. I would assume that maybe he gets a chance. But Jack Olson was also a 90% kicker in Chicago, kicking on a lake basically that was totally open because of all the renovations at Northwestern. So you put him in this environment where there's going to be far less environmental factors, and I think you can just feel good about what you have in him. I think the short and long kicker thing is also on the table. I just think it ultimately depends on how this kicker situation sorts out. But from what I've gathered, they feel pretty confident in the situation regardless and just where the competition is.
All right. Next question is from JUP Kane 17. Curious on your thoughts around realignment, given the Senate not voting on the Protect College Sports Act, where we stand in everything, and any update on AD search. Why have we not hired Jim Favola? So, Yeah, I mean the Protect College Sports Act got punted to September basically. Um, and look, there's a lot of things to know about this bill and everything it represents. I think from a Miami standpoint, though, you can kind of boil it down to two things about it are problematic for Miami. Number one, they want to cap conferences at 19. So that means the Big Ten could add one more because right now they're at 18, and the SEC could add three more because they're at 16. So that really limits the opportunity that Miami could potentially have to go to one of the Power Two conferences in the future. And I think one thing that maybe Miami's working on for behind the scenes or other programs behind the scenes is okay, can we get that cap that is being proposed in the Protect College Sports Act? Can we get that cap to be bumped up to like 21 or 22? Because that would, of course, be better for Miami in the long run as they look to change their situation eventually. The other issue would be there's a proposed budget for athletic departments where their cap basically is $48 million. And that's for the athletic department. So that would mean that's what you get to spend on football, basketball, baseball, women's basketball, etc., all combined, 48 million. That's problematic because look, if you are a competitive football program, you're in that $40 million range. And that's not including other programs, other sports that you have within your athletic department. So it's problematic because you need a runway to get down to that number. You can't just go from, like, I'm just throwing this number out there, but like, you can't be an LSU who has like a $90 million athletic department budget one year and then flip a switch and say, oh, now you got to get it down to 48 million. So that's also a problematic part of this bill that needs to be worked out, ironed out, etc. And look, from a Miami standpoint, the two things are how can Miami get to a conference? This bill's get to a different conference. This bill's making that difficult. And Miami honestly like benefits from operating financially like the system has now. Now, is it sustainable? That's another conversation, but like the way that this automatically just flips a switch to go 48 million across the board kind of evens the playing field in a significant way, which is not advantageous to Miami. As for the AD thing, yeah, I mean, Miami, as I've kind of hinted here on the podcast before, like Miami's going through their interviews. There's like three or four candidates. It's a lot of, it's a couple TV executives. It's another guy who does like, branding type of stuff. And, you know, I think in the question you mentioned the best option by far, but let's see. I think, I think the fact, as I've said here before, I think the fact that Jim Frivola is way, 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 way overqualified for this job and still wants it is insane. It's like when Mario Cristobal was at Oregon and wanted to come to Miami, and people outside of the Miami bubble are just like, what are you doing? Why would you want to go take that job? It makes no sense. Mario Cristobal has orange and green in his blood. Jim Frivola has orange and green in his blood. Uh, and Jim Frivola is the type of person that you should be hiring. But let's see what the decision makers decide to do. They almost made a disastrous hire at the AD spot, and so now they're kind of taking their time, I think it's fair to say. And but I do think they need to realize they have a massive opportunity here. Uh, this is an opportunity where it's like the rare low-hanging fruit option that is also a grand slam home run. So hopefully they make the right decision there. All right. So Gabby,
David,
let's
really quick, David. I just
yeah.
want to follow up. I want to follow up with that. How much, I'm just curious, how much, just from what you understand, does like, this legislation passing, there's obviously a lot of change going on. Is there any correlation between just like all this legislation kind of trying to be passed and navigating this like potential new era that we're kind of going into in college sports? Does that does the uncertainty around the Protect College Sports Act is that impacting the timeline on whether Miami has an AD or doesn't have an AD, or are these two separate issues?
I think they're separate issues. Now,
Okay.
I think it's time to get something in there, but I don't think Miami's like rushing because of this, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Got
So,
it.
which honestly, I'm fine with. Like at this point, this is the position you're in, and you got to make the best hire you can make for 10 plus years, not to rush into something that can help you with. I mean, honestly, like this bill isn't really probably going to ever pass, but it is an indication of like how the Big Ten and the SEC want to hold on to their power, and so it is an indication of kind of how they think and what where things stand with that. So in the long run, Miami does need an AD to kind of get into those doors of like Big Ten meetings and SEC power brokers and like schmooze and take the temperature on where things stand with all that. But in terms of like rushing into something because of this bill, I don't get that sense, and
Or
I
just
don't.
even holding, or just even holding off, like, hey, let's kind of wait and see where the chips fall, and then we can kind of make a more educated hire on someone that maybe fits whatever it is that's going on. I'm just asking. I don't know anything about that, but that's I'm just curious
I
because I do
think
feel like it's also interesting that Miami, like, this is all happening, and like, Miami does not have a sitting athletic director as like one of the premier programs
it's
in
not
the
great.
country right now.
It's not great. I think there's two priorities when you're looking at when Miami looks at hiring an AD. I think the first priority is how do you grow revenues? What are your creative ideas to grow revenues? You always need money in college athletics now, so how are you going to go about doing that? Number two, what connections do you have, or how can you get us to one of the Power Two conferences? And honestly, I think particularly, how can you get us into the Big Ten?
Right.
And so I think that's how they are looking at their candidates.
Yeah,
That's all
that
I'll
makes
say about
sense.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, one more question we'll get out here. Uh, Do you feel this from Title Loan Man? Do you feel better or worse about the offensive and defensive lines being championship caliber after a week of camp? Reading the tea leaves, it sounds like there's some meat left on the bone for pass blocking on the offensive line and edge setting on the defense. I think it's all there, Gabby. I think there's going to be ups and downs and twists and turns, particularly with the offensive line. But I think it's a group that has answers and they'll find it by the end of the season. And I think the defensive line is ultra talented.
Mhm.
Is their strength like just some of their personnel? Their strength is just not going to be like dude. Last year, Bain is a 275 defensive end. Mesidor's a 265 defensive end, and they are powerful dudes. And they have an Armando Blunt who can play that role, but they don't have anyone outside of that. And so it's just going to have to be some. I don't think it's necessarily going to be like a huge issue, but they're going to have to find answers and figure out how to navigate that too. But like, is the defensive line championship level? Absolutely, to me, yes.
Yeah.
Is the offensive line? I think from a talent perspective, it has the talent to get there. It's young though and inexperienced. And will it get there this year? We'll find out.
Yeah, I'm with you on definitely about the offensive line. I think like it's there. I believe that this is going to be a good offensive line. Like I think ultimately championship level and a good offensive line are different. We'll see if they ultimately
Right.
reach that, or even like call it, call what we call, I think we kind of call it also too, like college football playoff good. Like I think this offensive line can be college football playoff good. I think we
Hmm.
need to see more of it. I think the defensive line for sure. And yes, you lose the two edge rushers, but like I still feel, David, I still feel like not enough people are talking about the fact that you get the two defensive tackles back. Like,
Studs. Complete
yes, you're
animals, those guys.
right, right. So
It's
it's like
it's
you had
unreal.
the two freaky edge rushers last year. It may look different this year, but you have two kind of freaky defensive tackles this year, and those guys
Yeah.
could be total game wreckers on the interior. So I think this defensive line could still be really, really good. I think it's going to look different than it did a year ago, but I still think that this is a championship caliber defensive line because those defensive tackles are awesome. I think the edge rushers are going to be good enough that are going to, again, they're not going to be Ruben Bain and Nakeem Mesidor. Like that standard is crazy. It's like kind of asking a quarterback to be Cam Ward. Like we've kind of been exposed
Right.
to these like elite, like kind of once in a generation type of talents, but like not every defense, not every setting is going to live up to that standard quite. And that's unrealistic to expect. But I still think you could have really high quality defensive end play, really disruptive, good, pass rushers, run stoppers, all that stuff. And then with those defensive tackles, I have a lot of confidence in Justin Scott and Ahmad Moten. And I really do think that this defensive line is championship caliber.
I wrote today on the website, and again, just because I list these three, it doesn't mean that I don't think highly of the other position groups, right? So let's stop doing that. But but
You're asking way too much.
I I wrote on the website today three positions to me in the first week have emerged or like we kind of know or have a sense that like these are nationally elite position groups. And to me that means like top 5, right? So I said running back. I think Miami's running back room is ridiculous. You know, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Defensive tackle, Moten and Scott are crazy good. Keona Davis is good.
Yeah.
Jarquez Carter is better than people think. And then the secondary, to me, the story of offense in the first week is the running backs. The
Yep.
story of the defense in the first week is the secondary. This secondary is really good. And it's deep too. There's guys who aren't going to have huge roles that are really good and going to be stars next year because they get to
Yeah.
play a lot. So
I'm with
those
you.
would be the three position groups. Again, quarterback's also very good. Receivers also very good. Like all these other groups are good too. But like we're talking nationally elite, those are the three groups I would highlight.
I'm with you. I think all three of those groups are awesome. And again, doesn't mean that the other groups aren't. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun watching those units specifically this season. Um, I think it's going to be an awesome year, man. And I think that first week of fall camp, I think we learned a lot about this team. And I'm feeling, honestly, I feel better about this team probably walking out of the first week of fall camp than I did
Yeah, I
coming
do
in.
too. Yeah. I mean, look, we'll get into it in future podcasts. There are definitely things to nitpick about this
Hmm.
team if we're talking about a championship caliber roster and look. And we'll get into this in the future, but like nitpicking, right? But these nitpicking things won't impact beating Stanford, Wake Forest. Like all these things are going to be okay. We're talking about like beating Notre Dame, beating college football, 3 or 4 college football playoff teams in a row. That's where the nitpicking is fair. And I think it's interesting because then you're talking about the elite of the elite and matchups and, can teams kind of take advantage of this little thing that is fine in the regular season, but against a elite position group might be an issue. We'll get into that in a future podcast. I got to run. I got to get out of here. So we're going to cut this one short.
Yeah.
I appreciate everyone for listening. Go check out InsideView.com. Get you a subscription right now. We got 60% off an annual subscription deal. Go support our sponsors, and we'll get back after it here in week 2 for fall camp. Again, football's back, best time of year. And until next time, take care.